And to talk about that, John Gruchy joins us from MDWFP. He runs the private lands program. He is a wildlife biologist and kind enough to spend a few minutes. John, great to see you.
Oh, yeah. Appreciate it, Richard.
So let's kind of dive in terms of order of things. We're closing in on Labor Day weekend, which means dove season is almost here. If you have not prepared the way you need to, is there anything you can do at this point to get ready for dove season? You
can phone a friend.
Phone a friend who wants to be a millionaire.
Yeah. No, you can call a buddy and find another field. No, actually, for people who haven't already prepared a dove field, it's probably not too late. Of course, you can in Mississippi we allow folks to hunt over planted wheat. As if it's planted in a normal agricultural practice. And that means if you're going to broadcast the wheat, you have to disc the ground, and you have to distribute it evenly across the field, and it has to be no more than 100 pounds per acre, which is the approved planting weight rate for erosion control by Mississippi State Extension. It couldn't have been planted before August 1st, but of course we're past all that. And you can only do it one time. So if they don't, if you put it out and it germinates, we just had some big rains 2 or 3 days ago. Yesterday, today. And in a lot of places in the state. So if it rains on that weed and it germinates and you want to do it again, that is not bueno.
All right. So maybe not too late to go with wheat.
Yeah.
Cornfields are popular spots. Sunflower fields are popular spots as well. Are there any public options for, and I know you're over the private lands program, but are there any public land options for folks that want to dove hunt? Sure.
They can go to our website at mdwfp.com, and we actually have a tab there for the dove program, I guess. And when we have some fields listed on there, it's actually on the homepage, one of the revolving tabs, if you will. So it's out front. Shouldn't be too hard to find. We've had some significant impacts this year, as has everyone, on dove fields because of flooding, because of who knows what. We usually have a big youth field at Mahana in the Delta, and that's been a problematic. But we've got definitely a field at Black Prairie WMA that I know off the top of my head, and I believe we have one at Tuscumbia in North Mississippi. I'm not familiar. Again, like you mentioned, I'm more of a private lands guy. I haven't actually been directly asked that question in this year, so I don't know off the top of my head where our public land options are. But in general, we'll have I know some of those options were impacted by the flooding. So if you go to our website, you should be able to find that information.
John, with the private land, what has been the effect of some of the flooding on private landowners across Mississippi as a result of flooding that comes from public bodies of water? We've got the flood control lakes in Mississippi. I'm in North Mississippi in Oxford, where Sardis is right outside.
Sure.
We've obviously got other lakes like that across the state of Mississippi. Because of the mission of those lakes, we get backwaters and surrounding lands that are flooded, and then just private lands in general with creeks and streams rising. What's been the effect on private lands across the state?
Sure. So that's one of those difficult questions where you can't really broad stroke and say, well, it's always this or it's never that. It's going to be very situational. And so most people are concerned or will think about the flooding in the Mississippi Delta. A lot of the flooding in the hills is going to be temporary. The water will come up for a day, a week tops. Big Black River sometimes will hold water for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a month, depending on the spring. But for the most part, animals are adapted to deal with pulse flooding like that. Some of the normal flood activity, we get a lot of flooding in the winter, and that's happened for a long time, and they're adapted to deal with it. And so occasionally we can get a flood, untimely in the spring. It will directly impact turkey nesting. There will surely be some indirect impacts if we have flooding in the spring to turkeys. And this is, of course, kind of statewide rules. Now, when you start to talk about the landscape scale flooding and the duration of the flooding that we had in the Delta, we really don't have an analogy. That's a non-analogous situation in terms of we don't really know. But we are actually working with Mississippi State to conduct research right now. They've got a crew in the Delta, trapping and working up deer. And so we've got GPS collars on animals, and we'll try to gauge those impacts, I think, going forward. Historically, when we've done flood research, usually what happens in a normal flood, in the winter floods especially, the deer will leave the area and then they'll come back. Wild turkeys are a little more impacted. You can, if it's a spring flood in that type of a landscape situation, you're going to lose almost a whole year of reproduction, and that's bad. But they're adapted to deal with that. They can come back the next season and get a couple of nests off, and they're kind of an ebb and flow type species. So.
John Gruchy is coordinator of the Private Lands Program with MDWFP. He's on your radio right now on the JT Show on this Friday. So in terms of the calendar, dove season, and then we've got some other bird seasons that kind of open in the fall that lead us to deer season. There's a fall turkey season that's in there. So in terms of order, what are we looking at over the next 2 months?
Sure. So obviously dove season is the big one, and honestly that's always a concern, an important one for the agency. It's the first time that people are getting into the field with firearms for the year, and so we've got to obviously revisit firearm safety with individuals. We've got to talk particularly about safety, but talking about that's most times the first time people will buy a license for the year and that type of thing. So we got to get all those ducks in order. And, of course, there are federal laws that come into play there. So dove season is a big one. And then, of course, you mentioned fall turkey. That's only for certain regions of the state. And that, you can find out more about that on the website. That doesn't open until October 15th in those areas where it opens. The big one, again, though, would be bow season, obviously, October 1. So it kind of goes dove season, then deer archery season, and then we start getting into all those other things. But now, one I did fail to mention is gator season, which is which is now. A bigger deal. Yeah. Oh man, it's you can't even imagine how huge for the people who gator hunt. The whole year revolves around the gator season. So you either do or you don't. You either get it or you don't get it. And the people that get it is a huge deal. They're planning their whole year around gator season. So that is going on. Actually, the tags have been given out. So yeah,
on that front. So I've got family that lives in South Louisiana, and so going back, a decade and a half when I met my wife and kind of met them, we started talking about it, and they were huge alligator hunters. And it wasn't a big deal in Mississippi at the time, but I feel like over the last you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in the last decade to 15 years, this has really taken off in Mississippi. And, boy, we have seen some unbelievable gators that have been harvested along the way.
Sure. I mean, almost exponential growth. And I think that owes to, a couple of things. I guess social media and the Internet. Of course, there was some TV shows that really remember I guess Swamp People was the one that everybody so you get all that kind of stuff going. Plus what's been really interesting about the gator hunting is a lot of those people are first time licensed buyers. They're not our normal customers. They're maybe didn't hunt deer or turkeys growing up, and they're getting into this thing later in life. You got to be careful with the gator thing. Obviously, there's some safety issues there. But
I was going to say, does that concern you if it's a first-time hunter that says, you know what, I'm going to start out with gators?
Yeah. So obviously it does. So initially when we started this, we actually required every first-time hunter to come to a weekend training course. And that was very successful, and it got to be where we had a lot of reapplicants and all that. And so now that training course is digital online. And of course that was, before the COVID. So we do recommend a training course. We make that available, but we've recruited so many new people and have so many folks in there. And what we find is it's actually something people do as a community. Church groups or even external hunting clubs will make T-shirts and they'll have a big weekend. It's one person gets the tag, and you've got to really pay attention to those rules. But it's usually a lot of people involved in the actual hunt. So,
John, have you got time to hang for one more segment?
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit more, and we will transition when we come back to deer season, which John told you just a second. Archery season begins on October 1st. It may be a little late to try and prepare a dove field. He said maybe you need to phone a friend if you don't have that set up at this point. It's not too late to get your food plots ready for deer season. We'll talk about what you need to be doing to get ready for deer season when we come back. And we continue with John Gruchy from MDWFP. This is the JT Show. Richard and Continuing our conversation with John Gruchy from the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. He's the coordinator of the Private Lands Program and is a wildlife biologist. We talked a little bit about dove season, and while there are some things you can do, largely probably need to have the hay in the barn, so to speak, with regard to preparing dove fields and your location for dove hunts starting on Labor Day weekend. But I think, John, a little bit different story as it pertains to preparing for deer season, although there's not a ton of time to waste at this point, right?
Sure. Well, that kind of depends on your strategy, and there are a couple of different strategies people can employ in terms of preparing deer food plots. For the most part, when we talk to people about food plots, most folks are talking about what we would call cool season annual plots. So those are like your wheat, oats, cereal rye, ryegrass, any of those things that people are going to plant every year in the fall. And so a lot of folks, kind of have a tradition on Labor Day weekend. They get out and they plant their ryegrass plots. They'll scratch up the ground and plant them all in one weekend and fertilize them with, I joke, 200 pounds of triple 13. You know how many plots in Mississippi are broadcast ryegrass with 200 pounds of triple 13 and on Labor Day. But the reality of the situation is you can do a little better than that, and we know that, just from agronomy in general, there are better ways to grow those plants. But from a deer standpoint, you can also do a little bit better in terms of providing more palatable forages and forages that actually meet more of their nutritional requirements. So you can go to our website and try to get in touch with a private lands biologist, MDWFP.com/private lands, and we can do a little bit more specific recommendations to a property. And that is beneficial. You really want to maximize.
Is that based on, are those specific recommendations based on where in the state you are and what type soil you've got? Yeah. Or is it kind of one size fits all? So definitely it's going to be based on a whole bunch of different things. It's going to be based on your individual goals. So some people just want to kill brown deer, and we can make a plan for that. Some people want to kill they want to the hunt for the larger antlered animals, and so we can talk about all that. And generally, the food plots is just kind of the icing on the cake. Really, what we try to spend most of our time talking about is forest management, and field management, and harvesting the right number of does off of a property. Talking about which bucks to let go and let live. Food plots are really more of the I don't want to say gimmick or anything like that, but that's just one aspect of an overall management philosophy, and that's going to be really dependent not only from where you are in the state, what you want to do, and then even within the counties in the state, what individual features you have on your property. If you have a lot of soybeans growing near your property, you may not need to do things the same way as somebody who lives in the pine woods of East Central Mississippi. So there's a lot of things to consider. So a buddy and I last year planted. It was like a wheat clover mix.
Sure.
And, spread it and put some fertilizer out. Very basic setup. But there was this debate is not even the right way to describe it, whether or not it was worth the hassle of getting a tractor and having a disc and breaking up the ground. How important is that? I talked to some people that said, you know what, you really are going to benefit by breaking it up, even if it's just light. And there's some that are like, look, if you throw that stuff out, it's going to grow.
Sure.
So what's the answer there?
Yeah, so again, I hate to say it depends. A wildlife biologist, one of my mentors told me, you're always going to answer every question with "it depends." But anyway, I hate to keep saying it depends, but of course it depends on what you've got available to you and what you're seeking to do. So there are some of those throw and grow mixes, that are designed maybe to be put on top of the ground and reined in. Everyone, regardless of your objectives, will benefit from a few basic things. You need to soil test before you jump, and that's something that you can talk with your county extension office about. But essentially, you need to collect a soil test and have that soil tested. And usually that's going to take a little while. It's going to cost you about $7 or $8 a sample, and it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks turnaround time. And this time of year, they're fairly busy, so you got to do that a little bit ahead. And then you're going to have to decide what planting you want to put in. And if you're going to put something like wheat and clover out, you're actually going to benefit from disking the ground and getting the maximum what we call seed-to-soil contact. And, in fact, wheat needs to be planted at a slightly different depth than clover. So you would put the wheat in the ground and then, maybe disc that in, incorporate it into the soil, and then top sow that clover onto that freshly prepared seed bed, and that would be better. And also, if you push it back a little bit later in the year, so a lot of people want to plant in September, you're much better off to wait even till bow season, into October to plant so that you could, yeah. And the reason for that is if we keep warm weather and get a lot of rain, that forage could get out ahead of you and actually not be as palatable during the meat of the deer season. Well, the good thing about those annuals is they're doing a lot of their production in February when we have that bad nutritional stress period when bucks are coming out of rut and the does are pregnant and all that, and we got to get them through February. If they can get to March and April, the woods green up and they're in business, but we want to try to get them through that February stress period. So everybody's thinking about planting to, have something there in November, but we got to think about what they're going to do in February too.
John Gruchy from MDWFP. He is coordinator of the Private Lands Program, joining us in studio on this Friday afternoon. It feels like a 4-letter word. It's actually a 3-letter acronym. We got a message on the C Spire text line from Malcolm in Tishomingo. He says, can you give us an update on CWD? Obviously, he's talking about chronic wasting disease.
Yes, sir, man. I actually appreciate that question, and we anytime we can get a chance to give information out on that, we definitely want to try. Last year was a very odd year in a bunch of respects, but of course our sampling was down, and some of that we believe was related to coronavirus. Voluntary sampling, submission of heads, was down, we believe, and related to coronavirus because we just couldn't get out and talk to folks. But overall deer harvest was up, so people were killing more deer, just weren't sampling as much. And so we really want to go back to the well and try to get people to submit those heads voluntarily. We will have that on our website where the freezer locations are. There's going to be a few changes. We did have some new positives in Tippah and Alcorn County, so 2 new counties were added. But overall, the CWD zone shrank because we adopted a new management plan and basically got us to be consistent with several other states, Arkansas and Tennessee and Missouri. And so we used a different method to define the zone. So the zone overall shrank, but we still have several positives coming out of Marshall and Benton County. Tennessee had several positives. We've still got, that threat is there and is expanding, quite frankly. And so the best thing we can do is sample deer. If you are interested in the deer herd and this type of thing, or if you're concerned about consuming the meat, we've never had a human case reported of the disease. There's in all likelihood that wouldn't be a thing, but we definitely want to conserve the resource, and so testing your deer is a good thing.
I want to try and squeeze 2 things in with you before we finish up. First, a question. This comes from it's from, I don't know who it's from. Why can we not bait for doves? Just enforce the limit. What difference does it make if you kill the limit in 30 minutes or 3 hours? Everyone baits to some extent. What's your reaction to that?
Next question. No. Honestly,
sorry, I didn't mean to press a sore subject.
No, not at all. I just I don't want to. I don't want to debate anybody or anything like that. But I guess what it comes down to is that the fact that we can prepare crops, and in other words, that we can manipulate and sow wheat and do all these things that we can do for dove, essentially is a grace that comes from, this is a federal migratory bird, so there's federal regulations involved. And if you think about it, a dove occurs in an agricultural landscape. So if we didn't allow people to hunt over normal agricultural practices, you almost couldn't hunt doves legally, right? They have to be in that area. So I think when people see that and they say, well, if I can get away with this and if I can get away with that, why can't I just pour piles of wheat out there? It would cost me less money. The government's just trying to, make us spend more money and all that. If you think about the history of how this came about, that we were even given the grace, allowed to hunt over these prepared areas, we got to be okay with some of them living, guys. We got to be okay with having some restraint. So that's kind of.
Do you want to do it again next year?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I don't know that we've got time to really get into this. Interesting story from a study by the U.S. Department of Agriculture about white-tailed deer being exposed to COVID-19, or at least to SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. Concern?
Next question. No, so I guess that's also new. Our Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study, which is the group that the Southeastern states work with, it's out of Athens, Georgia. They just provided us with some updates. It does appear that deer are showing the antibodies. We have no idea what that means, anything about mortality. We don't know that there could be or would be a human infection from white-tailed deer having that, but that is a thing. It is, so we just don't know. Too early.
I think we covered a lot of ground in the last half hour. John, I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate you coming in studio. Really enjoyed the conversation. Informative. May have helped some folks out, and sure is fun to talk about the outdoors on a Friday as we get closer to the fall.
Sure thing, man. Appreciate it.
That's John Gruchy from MDWFP. He's the coordinator of private lands, or the private lands program with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Parks, Fisheries, and